Ninja. No, not that ninja. Yeah, now we're talking. Ninja, like Medic, is an absolute powerhouse staple of team gameplay, and also a demon in solo. It is by far the tankiest class, but also has some outrageous damage potential. In this video, I'm going to take you through the build I use, weapon setup, and the playstyle I have to run around like a lunatic chopping up Zeds. So the build I use is good for team and solo. There aren't any talents I'd change if you are just going to play one or the other. This build works equally fine for both. To start us off, it's Kenko. No, not that Kenko. His talent is insane because it gives you a constant source of self-healing. It also gives you a bigger tank for a medic to fill, making you quite literally more tanky. Once armor depletes, it's less replenishable, so having a bigger health pool scales further in multiple aspects. Then we go into Swift Current. Being able to grenade at your feet in rough situations is invaluable, especially with the following perks. It's basically a get out of jail free card every time you nade. For gadget talents, we're always going to be going into the utility talents. So we start off by taking the armor regen, which when coupled with Iron Castle, actually ends up in you generating hundreds of armor over the course of the game. The next talent I would say is Preference. Most of the damage you do is with melee heavy attacks because of how they scale, especially for the dual katanas. Additionally, the second part of the talent comes into effect for multiplayer Hell on Earth, as you're not really going to tank the boss as they can one or two shot you. So you're going to use a bleed bow, which scales off this quite nicely. Here I went with Warrior of the Wind, as I just like zooming around at max speed, and I find it hilarious stacking this with Z time with sprint slides, covering about 42 miles in a split second. Realistically, you probably should run Dead Calm. It's got more value in both modes, and movement speed is semi-irrelevant when you run with melee weapons anyway. Demon Stance is a no-brainer. Ammo capacity is semi-worthless when you recover projectiles anyway, and this also just helps make you an even better tank. Thunderclap here because your nades are a utility, not a DPS. Red Shadow is just huge. 30% damage reduction on an already massive health pool is another no-brainer, especially if you're getting off tons of grapples from your parries. Psyche Jutsu, super strong for controlling crowds and allowing you to get damage off without danger. More grenade perks, woo! Iron Castle, like I mentioned before, synergizes with how you apply grapple much more. You're going to be parrying a lot, which means more grapples, which means more armor, damage reduction, damage buffs, like this, all sorts of fun stuff. The next one is a huge bamboozle. I went into Unyielding because on paper it's better for everything except for bosses. Turns out it's bugged and it doesn't work. It doesn't give you the heal, and I don't think it gives you the damage buff either. It just never procs. If it did, I'd say it's the winner. That's if there's no diminishing returns or cooldown on the health part, because obviously you slice once, kill 5 enemies, get 15 health. That would be huge. But it's balked, so we go for Kuketsuki instead. It's still good. It works on bosses with the bleed bow, so you still get a lot of value out of it, even when you're killing flesh pounds and Scrakes. Inazuma is what makes our nade actually decent. When you throw it at your feet in a big crowd, it stun locks everything in its range. Hence we take talents to buff the range and generally just apply a boatload of control to a situation, which could otherwise turn out to be sour. It's a great talent. And then finally, we take Leopard Fist because it's just a straight damage buff to our actual damage off the grapple. It also buffs the damage of our team as well. We don't take any of the other talents because the grapple's damage itself is irrelevant compared to our weapons, and we don't have a talent or plan for going down unless you're a medic. For weapons, I'll show you Kiba, Yumi, and Katanas. Yumi is strictly for Hell on Earth and generally only for bosses that you're going to want to kite. Obviously, if you're in Hell on Earth on solo, you can basically tank and one-shot the bosses yourself anyway. For Kiba, I run Toxic Coating for more damage, though you can run Enfeeble to reduce enemies' damage if you choose. Padded Grip is essential and should be the first thing you upgrade, as it's the only attachment, same with the dual katanas, that gives you block power, which as you're doing parries and not just straight blocking stuff is all you need. Forget block stamina, we just parry everything outright because we're gamers. We then just run Electrified Blade and Pommel, as zapping Zeds controls them better and it destroys robot-y Zeds pretty nicely. And then we just run the Light Guard if you have a massive start budget, as it adds stun, and again we don't really care about block stamina. If you don't have the start budget, if you're like level 24 or below, drop the Light Guard. Prioritize the Grip, the Blade, the Toxic Coating. For Yumi, we make bosses bleed. It's good damage and it procs a heal for us. So for this we're going to run the Telescopic Sight, Burrowing Arrows, Flexible Frame as it's more damage and we're not building for stuns, Streamlined Quiver, as who needs an ammo cap when you can just pick up your arrows anyway. And then finally reinforced string, as more damage and easier to hit shots when running and spinning. And then, the star of the show, the bread and butter, katanas. For the katanas, we go a similar build to the Kiba. In fact, the only difference is we blade this one serrated and not electrified, because we'll be using these on bigger enemies and serrated does more damage, where electrified is really good as a start weapon because it's good for controlling the sorts of enemies that you get earlier on. In terms of bonus rolls, if you want to min-max, you can go for Z-Time Rampage and Melee Master, but they are just luxuries. I wouldn't waste materials running up for them if you plan on playing any other classes or you don't already have everything purpled out. Most of what I'm covering in this video is just about you, the ninja. However, when I'm talking about playing in a team, how you will play will revolve around your comp and plan. This is because there's two main ways that you can play Killing Floor as a team. You can either hunker down into a corridor where you're only getting attacked from two ends, or you can continuously rotate around the map. In my experience, if you want to hunker down and hold a corridor, you're definitely going to need a medic, or at the very least a teammate or two with a healing pistol. And you're going to want someone who can tank or destroy the opposite side. This tactic is going to require a lot of damage. It's fast and aggressive, so I wouldn't really recommend it for public matches. Now, typically when running this strat, one end is going to have a lot more spawns than the other. So as the ninja, you're going to want to take this side with the most spawns and play around whatever choke or narrow point you can control with your team. If you're running the alternate strat, where you're doing circles of the map, your most important role is to play the sort of vanguard and lead the pack. This is mainly to clear clutter and pull in husks. You basically want to make sure that there's an actual path for your team to move through, as collision is a big part of this game, and whilst in the previous strategy you can use it extremely effectively in chokes to protect a team, the enemy can also use it against you by jamming into a tight corridor, leaving you pinched between them and the rest of the Zeds that you're kiting. RIP. Solo, funny enough, is similar to playing in a team. You've got two ways you can do it. You can either just full on YOLO into the hordes and tear through them like a whirlwind of steel and death, or you can kite them around the map, picking opportunities to attack and keeping yourself safe. To execute the former chadified high risk high reward style, you're going to need a maxed build and very familiar knowledge of a lot of the Zed's parryable movesets. This is because you're going to need a continuous flow of parry healing, grapple regeneration and stumble crowd control that you're going to get from the talents. If you're playing at that level, this guide might not even be for you. It's probably beneath you. But I mention it anyway just to show the insane potential and the fun to be had with Ninja once you really get good at it. If, however, you are newer to Ninja and looking to practice, I'd recommend the stick and move approach. You'll be kiting the Zeds in a pack behind you, looking for moves you're familiar with enough to consistently parry. And once you land the parry, the group will stumble and you can release a few attacks, or even grapple through them, do some big AoE damage, and then dip out again. As to how you're actually going to play the game, most of the weaker enemies, and even some of the mid-tier ones, will die in one or two light attacks. This will include clots, gorefasts, bloats, husks, sirens, crawlers, etc. In fact, the light attacks are good to take care of everything except the flesh pounds and the scrakes. For the flesh pounds and the scrakes, I would generally recommend landing a parry just to stagger them a bit, and then throwing some heavy attacks at their heads. If you have the katanas, using their charge mode will one or two shot headshot them if you have enough damage stacked. Other than that, little tips would be if you miss a parry, keep block held, use the light attack to push away your enemies, and then dodge back and repeat the process. Start looking for the next parryable move. Nothing gained, nothing lost. If I see a large group of weak enemies surrounding a large one that I want to deal with, I'll just grapple straight in, as the large enemy will be stunned by the grapple and the weak ones will die to the AoE damage. It gets rid of the clutter and it allows you to focus on the big guy themselves. One damage tech that is completely borked is to use bash instead of melee attacks, and animation cancel once the damage has been applied, just by hitting reload. Just spamming this over and over again for obscenely fast attacks. For some reason this gets even more wacky during Z time, which allows you to do dumb stuff like this. Speaking of bosses, in solo you can just toe-to-toe them for the most part, if you spend a little bit of time learning which moves are parried and which are sidestepped. Most of the time doing circles of the boss is super effective. If however you need to kite, whip out the old reliable bow, get running. If you want some advice on kiting effectively, I've got a movement guide linked below, which will make you effectively invincible with very little practice. I'd say in multiplayer Hell on Earth, you're almost always going to kite because the bosses hit so hard. A few hits and your armor's gone, and then once the armor's gone, you're effectively one-shottable. Now, for those of you with a keen eye, you might have noticed I missed out the kunais in this guide. As this guide is to get people up to speed, I've not gone too into depth on the melee mechanics. Also, a lot of the information in this guide revolves around parrying. But as some of you are aware, kunais are completely busted, and I will cover a how-to guide with them when I've leveled them a bit more to the max and really nailed in their playstyle, so watch out for that. I cannot overstate how broken they are. Besides that guys, I hope you enjoyed. I hope the information you were looking for was covered, and if you want to see more like this, do a little subscribe, else I'm just going to start harassing you with Space Marine content instead. So take care, I'll see you on the next one, and I hope you have fun slicing Zeds.